You're listening to Badass Ladyfolk, a podcast about socially engaged women and NB femmes kicking buns big and small. I'm your host, Christine Sloan Stoddard. That badass intro music came from the song Talking Hands by Toxic Moxie. As I mentioned the last couple of episodes, and will continue to mention for the next few more, is that this is a reboot of my Radio Free Brooklyn show, The Badass Ladyfolk of Brooklyn. Now Quail Press and Productions is producing the podcast for and about incredible women and non-binary femmes from around the world. This episode is a pre-recorded conversation with fellow female photographers Natali Bravo-Barbee and Shawn Inglima. We recorded this as a Zoom panel to touch on the themes in my book, Heaven is a Photograph, a poetry and photography collection about an art student who finds her power behind the lens. During the conversation, I'll reference the video description, but know that these same links are available in the podcast show notes for this episode. Hello, my name is Christine Sloan Stoddard, and I'm the author of Heaven is a Photograph, a poetry and photography book about an art student who finds her power behind the lens. Released by Clash Books, this full-colored collection is available directly from the publisher's website, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and really wherever books are sold. I will drop the links in the video description so you can find them all there. And in this video, I'm joined by two guests, fellow female photographers based in New York City, and we'll be discussing our experiences and observations as women working with photography. Hi, Natali and Shawn.
Hello.
Let me read my guests' brief bios before we get started on the conversation. Natali Sabina Bravo-Barbee creates works at the boundary of photography and sculpture. Bravo-Barbee has been photographing her world since the age of 15, incorporating alternative processes such as cyanotype into her practice. The artist's practice uncovers lived memories of her family's flight from Argentina while simultaneously investigating post-colonial and feminist topics. Shawn Inglima, a photographer in New York City, is a storyteller at best. Whether it be through photojournalism or wedding photography, she encapsulates memories to be shared for years to come. Within the past 9 years, Inglima utilizes her female touch of compassion to bond with her subjects before telling their personal stories. So now we'll shift to the conversation. My book, Heaven is a Photograph, follows a fictional character, a young female photographer whose father is a war photographer, a strict photojournalist. This student makes a difficult choice to study art photography despite her father's objections and encounters challenges as she photoshops pictures of women, navigates the gallery and magazine worlds, and more. So Natali and Shawn, I'm told that these experiences from this fictional art student are pretty common. I know that I've encountered some of the same things. I wrote her character with a lot of my own experiences in mind. I would love first for you to just describe your own practice as a photographer. What kind of educational, commercial, photojournalistic, whatever kind of experience you want to mention.
Who will speak first? I guess I will, since I already did. My background is, I want to say, is comprised of education, like taking photography classes in high school. That's really where it all started. And then I majored in visual journalism at Penn State University, focusing primarily on photojournalism. I could not also major in photography because it was in its own separate school and they wouldn't let me combine the two.
It was an art program? It was a visual art program? Or it was something else?
Yeah. Like I was in the School of Communication and photography was in the School of Art.
Okay.
So that's why I couldn't do the two, because I did have the interest then to do studio work, but I just focused more on visual journalism. Learned a lot while studying there, and then immediately started an internship at the New York Daily News once I graduated. So I want to say that I learned more in the field than I did in schools. Like, I felt like in schools, they just kind of follow the book and they're just like, yeah, this is how you shoot with the camera. And here, you know, like, along with journalism, they have, like, you know, other forms of communication classes like media law and ethics and all that stuff to kind of just like make sure you're prepared before entering the world of journalism and print, with copyright and laws and boundaries of all sorts. But I feel like the most experience I have gotten is in the field, basically working and learning from my mistakes, learning from others, my peers especially. I feel like I learned more as a photographer that I became today from just learning off of other photographers, really, instead of relying on education, you know, per se.
Mm-hmm. And then Natali, you started photography when you were 15.
Yeah.
So what was that journey?
So I went to school in Long Island City. It was kind of connected to LaGuardia Community College, and we had access to the darkroom there. And I remember a colleague, a classmate, took a picture of me, and he came back a week later, and it was a black and white print of me. And that was the first time I'd ever seen myself in black and white. And I thought to myself, like, this is something I need to learn. And from that moment, the moment I went into the darkroom, it changed my life. There was nothing else I could ever compare to the experience of, like, having my hands in the chemistry and holding a camera in my hands and just, you know, having this glass to look at the world through. And so I continued, I did my undergrad focusing, I went to Hunter and I focused on photography, and then I got my master's at City College. And that was an interdisciplinary program, which then kind of changed how my photography, it changed my photography in general. I went from being, you know, just a conservative purist, black and white, darkroom, to then experimental. And it's been such a fun journey.
Yeah, I actually was always a lot more interested in writing and drawing when I was a little kid, but my father is a war photographer, at least he was for most of my childhood, and long before that. And I was interested in digital photography, but I just gravitated more toward video in terms of his influences, because it seems like more of a natural way to combine my love for words and images. But then as I went to college and just started doing more and more of my own thing, I got really into digital photography as a means of storytelling, but still often finding ways to combine it with words. Of course, I was highly, highly discouraged by professors to do anything in fine art or creative writing, even though I was studying those things. So my first internship, not that I should complain, was at the Washington Post, and it was very hard news, you will review thousands of images every morning and package slideshows and write captions kind of environment. But it was not at all conducive to developing a voice, especially as a young woman in an extremely competitive, uptight environment. So Shawn started to talk about the like the tension between education and hands-on experience. So I'm curious about both of you, just what sort of challenges did you find in more formal educational settings, but also maybe who are some of the mentors that you had, or what were some of the opportunities that surprised you? I know that I sometimes felt like my voice wasn't heard because I was a girl, but then once in a while someone would pull through and say, no, it's okay. What do you want to say?
Well, like back to what you were saying about your experience with like in school and the Washington Post, I actually had professors who basically told me to change majors. Like they were very bitter about the industry of photojournalism and journalism in general. And they were just like, there's no money in it. It's a dying industry. Get out while you still can. And then when I was an intern at the Daily News, I was told, like, it was kind of like as a joke, but they're just like, you might as well go to medical school. Like, if you want to make money, go elsewhere. Like, it's like, I mean, it's no lie that this is a dying industry. Newspapers are constantly closing down because they're not selling print or anything like that. And that's how I kind of evolved into doing more of different variations of photography. So it was just like, yeah, facing a lot of discouragements and, definitely in the beginning, I felt like because I was a young woman, I was not giving the same opportunities as my male colleagues, for instance. They kind of like put me with the cute, fluffy features, like, you know, with kids and puppies. And I'm just like, wow, okay, thanks. And they're just like, but you're really good at taking these photos. I'm like, but I don't want to take these photos all the time. Like, only take these photos. Like, yeah, it's a nice break, but my puppies, but like, I don't want to be known as the person who just photographs puppies. And so it was like, you know, a lot of trying to just prove myself to the point of actual physical exhaustion, like working overtime and, you know, putting myself in certain situations that were hazardous basically, or could possibly break laws. So, I mean, I didn't break any laws, I'm not saying that, but just to kind of like felt like there was more pressure to prove myself because I was a female photographer. And, you know, it took a while. I mean, not that long, but like, I don't know, like I just remember my first photo editor who no longer works at the Daily News, but he assigned me a very grim story and he's like, you'd be into this. I was like, why? Because I wear all black all the time, because that's all I own, black clothing. He's like, yeah. And I was just like, well, at least this is something different. Like, I'll take grim and depressing anytime just to like prove that I can actually handle it. Because I had other, you know, colleagues tell me that I wouldn't be able to make it in this industry. It would be too stressful. I would be too emotional or something like that. And I'm just like, you don't know me. You're just basically seeing this face and making assumptions, really. So I want to say now I feel like I have established myself to gain not gain respect, but to have respect when I enter a room, other than being automatically assumed I'm the intern or the assistant or not the lead photographer in a situation kind of thing. So I feel like I have built enough confidence over the year, because it was discouraging to, you know, start off fresh and be told these things that, like, you know, whatever you do won't matter because you're not a man. So yeah, just like, it's a huge journey. I feel so old now because I feel like finally I'm like comfortable where I am. So it took a long time for it though.
Natali, you want to respond to any of that?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot that resonates with me from what Shawn was saying. Is when I did my, between high school and undergrad, when I was doing a lot of work, I was lucky enough to have one of my professors champion me and really stand behind me when I didn't want to take cute little fluffy pictures. And for me, it was, I didn't want to be, it's not that there's obviously anything wrong with being classified as a woman, but I didn't want someone to look at my images and know my gender before they knew me and my story. And so for many years, I had this internal battle about the work that I was making through the camera. Like, if I photograph a baby, automatically that's what's expected. If I photograph a flower, that's what's expected of me, right? And so I didn't want to do that, and I began doing abstract photography to really just kind of blur out anything else. And you'd have to really look at my work and think about it more so before you even considered who was behind the lens. And I struggled a lot with making feminist work. It wasn't until I went to grad school that I kind of gave myself the permission to be a woman and be a photographer and tell my story and to use it to empower me and not put me down. And I did hear a lot of sexist comments when I began making feminist work. And I'd hear, there was a contemporary artist, very big name, I won't give it away, but he came and gave me a studio visit. And I had been doing gender studies, nude gender studies, where I'd interview my subjects, male and female, while they were nude, and I'd photograph them and we'd talk about gender. And he came in and he saw some pictures of breasts and he's like, I'm sorry, I can't have a serious conversation when there's a picture of boobs there. And I'm like, you're in your 40s, 50s, and you're a visual artist. Like, really, you can't have a conversation because there's a photograph of breasts behind me? Like, that to me was just this kind of thing, like, well, maybe we need to see more of this then. If that makes you uncomfortable, and you know, you're in my space, you should take it as what it is, and we should have a discussion about this. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I just can't look over there. And you know, and it was just, to me, it was mind-boggling. So I did go and I met with my colleagues after, and I was like, well, what was, you know, your studio visit like with this artist? And the girls were all like, he just put me down, belittled me, made me feel like, you know, less of an artist. Like, he was very condescending. And I knew that it wasn't just me, and it wasn't just a picture of breasts. It was something deeper ingrained in him that he needs to unpack.
Yeah, I completely feel what you're saying and have had similar experiences. And I know, I think it also took me until grad school to really get to that point where I just said, doesn't matter, bleep, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna make what I want to make. And if you think this looks girlish, or it's too feminist, or it's too womanly, or it's feminazi, or whatever, I don't care. I'll do certain work that has to make money because realistically I have to pay the bills. But when I am creating work that's just for me and that's for my creative expression, I'm going to do what I want to do. All right, so sort of going on that same topic. So do you think being a woman photographer, quote unquote, does influence the type of images you make, whether they're for commerce or for creative expression? And are there certain types of images that you actively try to make or even avoid making? And you can even bring up any specific work or client situation where you've been asked to make a certain type of image, whether you wanted to or not.
Well, like the whole saying goes, sex sells, and having mostly male editors is kind of like a pressure, not really a pressure, but there's like a strong implication that, especially for feature stories, that the sexier the better. And I'll admit that whenever I go to like a public event, like a big public event, I just look for the most attractive woman there to pose for a photo and just be like, this is the general shot, really. And it's like, no, it's because, you know, this is what the editors wanted. And, you know, it was just like, you know, I don't know how to describe it. Not like obviously annoying, but, you know, they sent me and they're just like, you just have a way with like getting the photos. I'm like, because I'm not a creepy man. You know, and that's like really what it all comes down to. They're just like, you just have a way with talking with women. I just like speak to them as a person. And, you know, especially like going to these events and there's other male photographers there, they are like, most of them are creepy, just to say, like, there are a lot of creepy dudes out there and a lot of them are photographers. Like what Natali was saying, like, you know, the photographer being like, I can't look at breasts. I've experienced a lot of perverted photographers, a lot of perverted editors, and they're just like, yeah, I like doing what I do because it gets me to see this, basically. So in like comparison to like in the beginning, like this is when I like first started like an intern, and then first year, second year, and just trying to establish myself, get more work, get more assignments. So I was just making the editors happy. So yeah, it was like a lot of, find the most attractive woman, find the one with the biggest breasts, basically. And like, because that's what they like. Or one editor, I'm not going to name names, there's one editor who has had accusations against him, so it all makes sense at that point. I was just like, oh, all right, okay, again, makes sense. That when he would come to me and compliment my photography, he'd be like, oh, I really like that photo that you took. And then news broke out that he has been accused of harassment, and I was just like, oh, okay, like it's just like a pattern there. But yeah, so it's like purposely looking out for that, but now I don't. Now I'm just like, they know the work I make, like they're gonna be happy whatever I give them now. Like I don't want to be too cocky about that, but like for instance, like my favorite parade to photograph is the Dyke March, which is like the day before the Pride Parade. And it's always so much fun to photograph that because it's just women and feminism. And, there are people who don't have their shirts on because it is legal in New York to be bare breast. And so it's whatever, it should be whatever. But, I'm photographing them as is, and they're like, I'm being personable with them. I'm not being creepy about it. I actually talk to them instead of photographing them at a distance and walking away. Like, some of the men do, but I remember the last time I photographed it, which was, I guess, a couple years ago at this point now because of the pandemic. It was like around the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. So it was like, big energy, like, I got new activists, old activists, all marching together. And we marched all the way straight from like Bryant Park to Washington Square Park. And once everyone got to the fountain, they started ripping their clothes off and going into the fountain. They're swimming, they're splashing, all that stuff. And I'm getting in the fountain with them. I'm like, this is fun. Like, it's hot outside. Everyone's like refreshing themselves in dirty fountain water. But of course, there were creepy photographer guys, like male photographers who were just like, trying to get as close as they can to them. And of course, the women just screaming at them, go away, that kind of thing. And also photographing like body painting artists and like National Body Painting Day. And oh my God, I would get yelled at because I purposely put myself in between a perverted photographer and the subject. So it's like a female model who's just getting painted and a guy literally like shoving a camera like as close as he can to her vagina. And so I'm just like, I have to intervene. I have to protect these models because they're perverted guys. And so I'm really going off here. I'm like, I forgot what the
No, it's okay. On that note,
well, I guess like it's just like the whole like, yeah, like purposely making everything overly sexual for male gaze to now actually preventing other photographers from doing that. So I don't, it's just like, it's a habit that needs to change, honestly. Like sex doesn't sell. It just bugs the male eyes out. That's really all it does. Yeah, I don't know.
Natali, what similar or related experiences would you like to share?
Well, everything that Shawn was mentioning, it's on the field, you experience it. You see the creepy guys that are constantly like gawking at women, attractive women, or, just any woman in general that they want to get close to. And so I've always also have been the kind of photographer that I'll intervene and I'll be like, I'm always courteous. I ask for permission. I'm not sneaky. I don't have to use a telephoto lens. If you don't want me to be up close to you and get your picture, I shouldn't be sneaking to get it. I kind of have this feel like, I think that catching someone in their natural element without them, it's fine, but you should always kind of, have some kind of control, like let them know, I did take this beautiful picture of you, look at this, I know a lot of creepy photographers who like, they like to do that from a distance and just watch, and I always feel a little uneasy about that because I wouldn't want to be in that position where someone's doing that to me. I like to treat my subjects the way I want to be treated. And that's how, since I've been a photographer, that's been my rule of operation, has been just always treat anyone that you're photographing the way you would want to be treated. If you want to be sneaky about it, at least then fess up to it. Because at the end of the day, can I really use this image freely if I'm afraid that I don't have permission from that person? But I think that creepy guys with cameras, they're an abundance in the photo world, no matter whether it's commercial photojournalism or even fine art. There's always an excuse for a creepy guy to have a camera. And recently, in one of the Facebook groups that I'm part of, there's been an article about how a certain photo agency likes to stand behind white men that go to third world countries and photograph women and children, the vulnerable people in vulnerable situations, and they sell them. And the tags that they're using are, it's just, there's no morality behind this agency that does these things. And they continue to pay these photographers to get these shots that are just horrendous. And so for me, I like to read on this and know where I stand and draw my lines for the kind of work that I support and that I can stand behind and what I can. And so, but the thing is, most people don't like to talk about subjects that are uncomfortable in the photography world. And so that's where I think feminists are really important, because we're here, we're loud, we want to make our points, and you're going to hear us whether you want to or not. And so if who's going to stand up for women besides women?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point, that it's not just male photographers being insensitive about sexuality and gender issues in a creepy, perverted sense. It's also about a lack of sensitivity when it comes to vulnerable subjects. And that can be mother and child pictures, even in New York City. It doesn't have to be in a developing country, but yeah, that's a whole subject in and of itself, poverty porn. And white male photographers also dominate that field.
I think they dominate most fields that are to art, and even outside of art. But if you look at art, anytime that you're going to any show, you count the number of white male photographers in comparison to women or male photographers of color. You're always going to be outnumbered.
Yeah. Well, and I also wanted to elaborate on Shawn's point about standing up for yourself and your beliefs at the beginning of your career versus when you're slightly more established, because there's a huge difference between being allowed to speak up when you're 18, 19, 20 years old versus when you're closer to 30 or when you're older. And I know that I was in similar experiences where I wish I had had the courage to say certain things, or I wish that when I did have the courage, someone even listened to me and didn't just write me off as some young woman who's just starting out. And what does she know? She's probably going to get married in a year and have a baby and be done with all this anyway.
Because of like the social norms and expectations of women in society, they're just like, that's why we're not taken as seriously, because it's just like, well, you're eventually going to meet a guy and have a baby and start a family, and that'll
be the end of it.
And that'll be the end of it. Like, not to say whoever decides to do that with their life is wrong. It's not. It's their decision, and that's great. But I hate it, especially when you're starting off in a career that's so heavily male dominated, and you have like all these men who like are like just scummy characters, and agencies and editors and so on defending them, being like, well, they make great work, I don't care what they do behind closed doors, kind of thing. But God forbid, if you're a young woman starting off in this career and you make one error, that's it, you're done. You're like deemed like unfit for this career. And so it's like, yeah, that's like kind of like what I was like thinking back on, like what I just mentioned, just like having that lack of confidence in the beginning and meeting other colleagues who are the same age as me and they act like they own the world. And I'm just thinking, I have so much on my shoulders just from expectations, like what men expect me to be. And then, expectations of being a woman engaging in a career. And it's just like, I wish I had that confidence, but it's impossible basically if, we're still treated this way of being like incompetent, really.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's Right. It's like a seen as us having a lack of intelligence and creativity, that we don't have the artistic genius, we don't have the news judgment, we whatever kind of photography it might be, we can't do it unless it's puppy photography and baby photography.
It's like we can't use our own experiences to pursue our own careers because they're just seen as too emotional. Like, oh, you're just overreacting. That's why you're passionate about it or something like that of the sort.
Yeah, and that emotion is a bad thing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, like, you know, I want to be close to my subjects, and it's like, it really, like, it upsets me when I do like photograph, like, you know, a person who is the trending story of the day. And of course that means they're going to be hounded by other members of the press, video photographers, reporters, and so on. And they actually tell me, they're just like, wow, it's actually nice to actually talk to somebody instead of just being told what to do, ask questions, no communication whatsoever besides that. And like them just feeling like they're put on a platform that they are uncomfortable being in. And like, you know, especially like talking to like women who have been like assaulted and are in vulnerable positions already, and they're uncomfortable as is talking about their experience and just actually being talked to like a human being, rather than like, say, a man being like, so what'd you do to get in this situation? Like, what did you do wrong? Like, that's like the first thing that's like always brought up. What did you do wrong? And it's just like, no, I'm just like, this is terrible. I'm so sorry this happened to you. You know, if any time you want to stop this, I'll stop. I'm not going to force you to do anything you don't want. So it's also that whole, you know, understanding consent, which, you know, sadly men just don't understand, like mainly don't understand now. It's like, you know, it's just consent. And they're just like, but there's like gray areas. I'm like, if there are no gray areas, it's yes or no. There is no maybe, and there's nothing like that.
So what advice do you have for female photographers who might just be getting started, whether they're young, they're teenagers or young adults, or women who are really just beginning to explore photography, change of career, change of hobby, new interests, maybe because of the pandemic, maybe something else?
Mm-hmm.
What would you tell them about being a woman and dealing with men and some of these sexist notions that can also come from other women?
Mm, yeah, like that's like the other thing to that, because you know, it's starting out, I was hoping that any other female photographer that I would encounter would be, you know, encouraging for me and like, you know, have that common ground with somebody. But because this is a male dominated field, I felt like more what's the word,
Like alienation?
standoffish or
Oh,
something
okay,
like
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Like, because there's usually mostly men at like an event, for instance, and if I see one woman there, to me, I'm like, oh, thank God there's another woman here. But maybe for her, especially if she's older than me, she goes, oh, great, this is my replacement, you know? So it's like that competition that women are put in a male dominated area, and especially like people of color, you know, because they are the diversity, and they're just like, you know, being competed against each other, and you know, it's just very discouraging. So I mean, for new female photographers especially, I have guest taught at an NYU photojournalism course that a colleague of mine is teaching in, because he wanted a younger person's perspective on the industry, because he's way older than me. Not to be like he's old, but you know, it's just like new generations, new trends, and all that stuff. I basically told them, take as much advice as you can, take in any criticism, good or bad. Criticism is always helpful. Learn from it. Don't be like standoffish about it. Don't like be like, oh, I don't care about this criticism. But I told them point blank, you will experience sexism in this industry, but don't be discouraged by it. Like I have been told just randomly, especially yesterday, there was like an older guy who's just like, I hope you get good shots. I hope, like, oh yeah, you're definitely going to get a good shot in that position. And I'm like, get away from me. You know, he just like this older man who was literally pissing off everybody because he constantly got into everyone's shot. Like he was just an old man who didn't know what he was doing, inexperienced. It's always the most inexperienced men who tell me what I should do.
Oh.
And I had, like,
Ugh.
I remember I was at another, yeah, it's like, oh, like, it's just, oh, it makes your, like, my skin's crawling now because I hate it so much. But there was an event, and, you know, I'm there because the Daily News was, I think, promoting it at the time, and, or a partnership. So they're like, of course, we need a Daily News photographer there. And here's Shawn, she does events, so she can do this event. And I'm there, and there's other male photographers there. I think I was the only female there. And this one guy wouldn't leave me alone, and he was just like, you should definitely go to school for photography. And I was like, I don't need to go to school for photography. And he's like, you'll definitely benefit by going to school for photography. Like, and you should give me your emails because, you know, without my connection, you wouldn't be able to get into school. Like, I needed him. And I just met this guy. I don't know his name. And he's just like, you should give me your information so I can get you into a photography school.
No.
And of course, I look over, I'm shooting Canon, he's shooting Nikon. He had the auto setting on. He's not shooting manual whatsoever. He had the pop-up flash, and I'm like, oh my God.
Okay, I'm gonna cut you short just so we have Natalie share some of her advice.
Yeah, I see Natalie being like, oh.
For the new female photographer who's trying to navigate this world.
So my advice, I think, I always like to think about any advice that I would give myself as a younger artist or younger photographer, understanding, because I don't feel like I got enough. I didn't have enough mentors, and I didn't have enough women guiding me, because there's always this feel of competition. This is going to be the one that replaces me, or she can get, you know, she's younger, she might get this. And I still get a lot of that kind of from I have found my group of women that empower me and support me. But when I go away from my group, I do get this kind of feel from other women that are like, oh, she's just young and she doesn't, you know, she's trying to be where, you know, where the big girls are. And it's like, come on now. Like, there's no need for all that. But I think that finding your voice and sticking to it. I think that speaking up for yourself is one of the most important things. I also think, with that being said, accepting criticism is important. Whether you disagree or not, you always have to hear out your critics and the critiques about your work, and let that process and develop. And you can even, you know, one of the worst things that I hear from younger artists is when I'm doing a studio visit or a portfolio review of work, and they're not letting me finish what I need to say. And I'm like, well, you wanted my opinion and you're not even letting me get it out there. And I try to be respectful with my criticism, because I know how hard it is to get criticism. But I think that listening and taking what you need and then getting rid of the rest, just take what you need from that. It doesn't mean if someone tells you, oh, all of this is garbage, but this one thing is good, doesn't mean that you have to take that whole, you know, only the good part. Listen to what the bad is, make of it what you will, and then continue. And I think it's such an important thing. People looking at your work and talking about it, that's the most important part, really. I work in solitary in my studio most of the time. So for me, I always welcome any studio visit, anyone that wants to talk about my work. I welcome it, because that's the point of making the work, isn't it? Really, to have conversations and dialogues about it, and learn and research about what you're working on. I think those are just like the most important things. Research, stick through your guns, listen to the criticism, and put yourself out there. Even it's so uncomfortable to do it, but put yourself out there.
Yeah, definitely. You have to be willing to self-promote and make new connections too. Unfortunately, It's not just about beautiful or interesting images. We wish. We wish.
Yeah.
Okay, so did the pandemic change your photography or your approach to photography in any way? And what kinds of images are you making now?
So for me, the pandemic changed the way that I work a bit, because I'm home all the time, and I am also a new mom. So my child just turned a year old, and for me, documenting this this process of becoming a new mom and an artist has been really interesting. I look at it as I have a tool that I can use to tell my story. Once once I figure out what the story is, I'll have the images to go with it, but it's constantly developing. And I think that I was afforded a really wonderful thing with this pandemic. For a lot of people, they're like stuck at home and it's horrible. For me, I was dreading the time when my maternity leave was up and I had to return to work and I'd have to leave my child. So for me, I was given this wonderful time to be able to, my studio's in the back of my house, so I can work and I can be a mom and I didn't have to choose. And that was an amazing thing. So I took it for what it's worth. And I'm so happy with it at the moment, being able to work and figure out what I'm supposed to be doing as a parent.
I feel like for me, it's like the complete opposite. I feel like, because especially it's just like all these events are canceled and that's like a huge part of my income. So it's a lot of me just staying at home, hoping I get work. I was furloughed for the summer, so I really did nothing. I mean, it was like a nice break for me because it was actually me being able to see my family more often. Obviously social distancing, we're taking precautions and stuff, but spending time with my partner. We adopted a cat who is, I don't know if you can hear him, he's meowing because I shut him out. And so it's like for me, especially because weddings especially, it really takes a damper on your social life because it's always on weekends and you don't really see anybody ever because everyone's working during the week and I'm not really working during the week. So it was like a nice break from basically 8 years of working 6 to 7 days a week to basically working no days a week. But now that I'm working again and being booked for weddings for this coming year, it has really affected my level of trust in people. Like I feel like before I was more personable with people, more engaging, and now I'm hesitant because of course, health reasons, but also moral reasons, say if they don't want to follow necessary precautions, wearing a mask or sanitations or anything like that. And it's just like, this pandemic has really, because, like with any artist, there are low points, you feel not confident in your work and you don't know what you're doing with yourself. You're thinking about starting a new career and, something to hopefully make you more happy. But I don't know, I just feel like this whole year has been just so up and down with emotions for me. And I guess now I feel like a little bit more balanced and hopeful for the future, that I feel like more inspiration is coming to me now. I'll admit that like over the summertime, I felt no drive for anything. I just wanted to stay in bed. I felt like there was no reason to get out of bed. And I feel like people just need to accept that, because I feel like more people are just down on themselves for letting them get to that point. But I feel like with that experience has inspired me to start new projects for myself, to like further pursue those kind of emotions and get starting on making my own studio in my own apartment, instead of relying on, clients hiring me, making work and using that as an excuse for projects. But yeah, I'm just like hopeful for the future now, and hopefully we're gonna get out of this pandemic, and just kind of, I don't want to say go back to normal life, because normal life wasn't all that peachy to begin with. So I mean, just to be honest, like, people being like, I want to go back to the way it was. I'm like, it wasn't that great to begin with. Hopefully this is an awakening for a lot of people, and will hopefully create new perspectives on just humanity in general, basically. So I'm looking forward to how things play out, especially with public events, or people in generally in public, and how they interact with each other, and hopefully more compassion out of that, really.
Yeah, I wanted to echo what Shawn, you were just saying about turning down some work too, and not trusting.
I mean, I turned down, yeah, it was mostly weddings I turned down because I didn't feel comfortable with it, because it was mostly because I felt like the clients weren't taking this pandemic seriously. And really through this year, it was me putting myself first. Like before, I would just take whatever work was given to me and be happy about that and be like, I'm working, that means I'm happy. But now I have a huge new perspective on life, and I'm just like, no, I am important. And if I'm not comfortable doing something, I should stick to that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, like Natalie was saying too, though, I also have felt that there have been some small blessings. It's just been this constant back and forth, very emotional, right? This huge roller coaster, like blessings in that, okay, I have more quiet time. I can focus more on studio work, work that I want to make. And sometimes there will be a monetary outlet for it, and other times there won't. Other times it will just maybe be for the long haul, and we'll see what comes of it. But I also, I didn't make as much money as I wanted to, but I was also lucky that I still made enough money to be comfortable and do more than just survive. I'm also lucky that I'm married, and at the times that my husband was furloughed, I actually had more work. And that when I did turn down work, I always felt that it was for the right reasons, that I didn't trust that someone said conditions would be a certain way. Or sometimes the turnarounds, because a lot of the more commercial work I do is writing or editing driven, like photo editing. So sometimes I just didn't, especially if I had been like hanging out in bed a lot and had like my quarantine depression, like, oh, the past couple days I haven't had a lot of energy. Maybe I don't want to suddenly edit 100 images and write all of these captions and have them ready for a social media campaign. You know what? Maybe I will forfeit that money and just just relax. And I know I can count on money from something else instead that maybe is not so stressful, or maybe is due at a later date. It's and I understand that that is all a privilege to be able to turn down work too. But like you said as well, prioritizing yourself and prioritizing your family or your partner, or just having as healthy of a life as you can make for yourself during this time is also important. And it feeds into your art making. It's hard to make art if you are starving or depressed all the time, or just battling other things.
Yeah, it's definitely a privilege to turn down work, because I can imagine so many people put in a position where they cannot afford that, and I feel so sorry for them. But I just like now reflecting on like my past years working and just feeling like I had to constantly work. I had to constantly prove myself, to now being in this point where I'm just like, you know what, I'm putting myself first. You know, I'm not too worried or too pressured to make a point. Like as a professional photographer, I don't need to be out there photographing a pandemic if I don't feel comfortable doing it, kind of thing. And especially since I've seen like so many of my colleagues who did work during this pandemic, a lot of them got furloughed, but a lot of them who did work, a lot of them got sick, a lot of them got exposed, and that really frightened me. And, you know, the past year I was in and out of the doctor's office for respiratory infections constantly because I was overworking myself. So I was just like, I'm like, nope, this is where I draw the line. I'm thinking of myself, I'm thinking about my family. This is like, you know, the privilege I have, and I'm taking advantage of it. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with acknowledging you have privilege and, you know, being able to afford doing something like that.
I also think that the pandemic has forced me to, and being furloughed, I'm an art educator, and I was furloughed last March, right when my maternity leave was up. And being furloughed forced me to push myself into places that I wasn't comfortable doing before, like selling work, like little prints and things like that. Before I was like, I don't want to do that. And then now it's like someone's like, oh, well, how much for this one? I'm like, oh, well, let's get to it. Now I have, you know, I know how to operate this selling of my work individually without a gallery and things like that. And I think it's been, I kind of was the one that was standing in my own way And it took a pandemic to force me to get out of my own way. And, you're not making the money that you were making before. And now you need to continue making work and making money. And now you have to figure out the formula for how you're going to do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it's something I've heard many female artists of all kinds say during this period is that they have explored e-commerce for the first time, really, or they've thought about different ways to put their visuals in books, on t-shirts, on whatever, just finding something outside of the gallery grind or outside of the teaching classes in person every day grind or the going out on a news assignment every day grind, and just, oh, how can I repurpose some of these images or edit them and give them a new home?
That's all the time we have, folks. Thanks for listening to the Badass Ladyfolk podcast. I'm your host, Christine Sloan Stoddard. You can find out more about me at worldsofchristinestoddard.com and more about Quail Bell Press and Productions at quailbell.com. And if you really want to watch the original video for this Zoom conversation, go ahead. It's on Quail Bell Magazine. Find the links in the show notes. Tune in next time.